Welcome to Janice Edwards TV, Bay Area Vista. I'm Janice Edwards, and thank you so much for joining us. On our show today, this is part two of a show focusing on our global climate crisis. We started our show talking with Dr. Carl Hunt, Dr. Stuart Kauffman, who is speaking at the United Nations Climate Change Summit this week, and Minister Mike Gottschalk. For the second show, we also are having Veronica Mata, who is a co author of Paradoxes of Power, join us. This show delves into more actions regarding what can be done to help deal with our global climate crisis. I started the show with introductions of each person, and then we got back into our discussion where we left off with Minister Mike Gottschalk talking about a regime of love and creativity being the answer to some of the problems that we're facing. Now, Carl holds a Ph.D. from George Mason University, and in one of his recent articles, he collaborated with his longtime colleague and friend, Dr. Stuart Kauffman, who's a medical doctor, a MacArthur Fellow, and emeritus professor of biochemistry and biophysics at the University of Pennsylvania, the author of 6 books, 350 articles, and those are just a few of his credits. I also want to introduce our third guest today, who is theologian and minister Mike Gottschalk. He is founding a new kind of church. And Mike studied fine art at the University of Minnesota Duluth and theology for 3 years at Crown College, Minnesota. He is on the forefront of Reimagining Church, and he and Stuart have collaborated for years on articles regarding theology and science. And joining us now, we also have Veronica Mata, who is a co-author of Paradoxes of Power. She's a small business manager and also the daughter-in-law of Carl Hunt. So, Veronica, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for being here with us again. Glad to continue our discussion. So, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's glad to have you. And we'll hear your thoughts in just a moment. But on our last show, we left because of, how timing goes in TV. We left with Mike talking about love and creativity being part of the answer for addressing the myriad problems we're facing when it comes to a climate crisis. So, Mike, I'd like you to elaborate on that thought, please.
Yeah. So, and I can say the love and creativity bit because of what the scientific work that Stu has done to bring out creativity as such a prominent part of this biosphere that we're in. And then what I do is when I think about love, I compare it to greed, because to me, both of those are in the business of wanting, but greed doesn't care about the other one. Whereas love, needs to keep uplifting the other one. And so when I look through human history, always seems to be a human presence that is hell-bent on greed and cleverness. And against that force, there's another group of us that is always trying to bring out love and creativity. And it feels like that's almost a beginning point, is a mind change, not just a habit change.
Yes, it is true. That's a great place to start. And Veronica, I want to bring you into this. You heard our first show. And what are your thoughts and principal concerns regarding climate crisis and thoughts about what needs to be addressed to change what we're seeing?
Yeah, thank you again, Janice, for having me on. There's a lot of things. I think for a lot of millennials like myself, it's been a lot of our life. I've not known when we weren't recycling or learning about certain elements in school. And now it's just becoming more prevalent. We're more of a bigger part of society. And I think we're realizing the things that we can actually do, other than just voting, to really change and help the environment. So a lot of people are cutting their meat, or a lot of people have been thrifting for a long time. I do that mostly. Most of my wardrobe is from thrift stores. I think a lot of people are cutting back on purchasing so much to really appreciate the things that we have and to not get to take advantage of what we still have on this planet. I think the shortages that we're seeing here is kind of a symptom of what Mike was just saying, our constant wants, or a little bit of our greed. We so many decades we've been able to just make and have whatever we wanted. And now we're realizing that that's not always the case. And that's not something that we necessarily need either.
Yes, very well said. And as you have grown up as being aware of the environment in a way that others of us were not as aware of in our childhood, when you talk to your friends and colleagues, on the one hand, there are the looking at thrift stores, looking at all that. On the other hand, we're in the era of Uber Eats delivering everything, and then we've been through the pandemic. Do you see among your friends and colleagues a similar concern that you share?
Absolutely. Yes. I think a lot of people are changing their lifestyles. I know a lot of friends, on a more personal note, a lot of people don't want to have kids because they know the environmental impact that might have, and that how we have a lot going on already on this planet. And again, a lot of people are changing their lifestyle. My brother and I were just having a conversation the other day about focusing more on eating chickpeas. I like that Stu was mentioning about, the three sisters of planting, but that chickpeas and soy and other ways that we can still live our lives healthy and have enough of the proteins and supplies that we need as well. So absolutely, I think I notice a lot of people are kind of changing their lifestyles and then the way that they want to live, and then the way that they treat each other too because of that.
Really thinking about the carbon footprint.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the impact in that way as well. Well, that is encouraging to hear. I know that, Stuart, in our previous discussions, you talked about the planet that is going to be left. So as you hear Veronica share these thoughts, what are your thoughts in relationship to what is coming for the generations who are coming and what they're facing?
Well, first, Veronica, I'm so glad to hear you saying what you're saying. If we continue the way we're continuing, we are in fact destroying the biosphere. If I may, I'd like Janice to put this in a very simple context. The velocity of goods in one direction is the velocity of money in the other direction, and that's GDP. How do you increase GDP? Well, you have a greater velocity of goods in one direction and money in the other direction. But one way of doing that is to invent new goods. But another way of doing it is to make goods that break down rapidly, like planned obsolescence. They just break down rapidly, and then you have to buy new goods. This is so prevalent. So let me just point it out.
Like the iPhone 13?
I'm not even talking about that.
Okay.
When I was learning, when I was about 16, some long time ago, I had a safety razor that my father gave me that was made out of, I guess, steel. And you unscrewed it, and there were these things in it that you called blades. And you went to the dime store at the time, and you got a little paper package with 10 blades in it. Each one lasted about 3 weeks. And you threw the blades away, and they rusted somewhere. Now, if any of us goes to a pharmacy and you want to get razors, you get something like a big plastic package, and it's got 10 plastic razors in it. Each one has triple blades, and they last 3 weeks too. And when you're done using them, they go to garbage heap, and the plastic lasts 10,000 years. Why exactly is that progress? And the answer is it's not. Another example, 40 years ago, you could buy a car battery that lasted several years. Car batteries tend to last about a year now. Do we really think that we can't make a battery that lasts 10 years? And why don't we? Because you sell more batteries. If you go to the grocery store, Trader Joe's is here in town, everything is in shrink wrap plastic. I thought, this is wonderful. It's to preserve the goods. That's not true. They're shrink wrap in their plastic wrappers because they're pre-weighed and pre-sorted. It's faster to check them out at the check counters.
And now have some of that even changed because of the pandemic, I'm wondering, in terms of packaging, whereas before, just even with vegetables and shopping, before there was the concern about the airborne virus, then more things were out, but now more things are packaged as well.
Also, but there's a broader point to make. My mother-in-law, who died a number of years ago, Claudia, grew up in northern Italy in Porto Ceresio, And so 80 years ago, when the people went to the local little stores, all the goods were out to be picked. And what you did is you went into the store and you had a basket and you picked goods up and you talked to your neighbors about the kids. It was a social place. Life was slower and more meaningful. We are rushing. Why are we rushing so much? We absolutely don't need to. We need to be slower. So
Well,
if you put that together with what Veronica, you face, you would face a lot less if we all realize that we're of nature, not above it. We're conservative the way you're talking about, a lot more vegetables, a lot less meat, built things that lasted 20 times longer, so you didn't need to keep buying new things.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we building things that only last a month and then we throw them away rather than building things that last 10 years? And
so
the answer is because you make more money. It's systematically stupid.
well, it comes to reimagining culture in that way. When we think about some of the reports when we were doing the shelter in place of how animals were returning to areas and the
Right.
skies were bluer there, but and in certain areas animals were surprised and when people started coming back again. So there was a time when in discussions some thought we wouldn't see commutes go back to where they were with everyone rushing in, but indeed in most areas they have returned to that. And so at this time there, and Mike, I'll ask you to weigh in on this, there's both the spiritual component as well as the economical, because that sense of wanting some normalcy has meant for some people getting back to some of the hustle and bustle and rush that was there before, even though there were some silver linings in the very dark, horrific cloud of this pandemic that is still going on, of being able to be more still, figure out things, connect, even if you can't connect physically, but to connect in meaningful ways, even through technology. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. It's I've heard this from my own son, who's been listening to me talk about some of this stuff for years, trying to make sense of it. And he thought what was unique about this moment was this rupture we just went through. That our first line of realness in our human experience is our culture, but we forget that the realness is beyond culture always. And then when culture becomes so ingrained and calloused, and maybe even opaque, that we no longer see the realness beyond us, we have no way of even telling the difference anymore. And I think what I like about TAP is it says mathematically what the biblical text has been saying for all these years, that we're told ahead of time how we do ourselves in, and then we go ahead and do it anyways. And how stupid is that? And I think, both Veronica and Stuart and yourself are really getting at, during this rupture, we could be opened up to, a promise of experience that we have yet to achieve. A more meaningful and soul fulfilling sense of existence together, helping each other, making our living while we take care of the planet, from which serves as much of our contingency as God ever did.
And it is wonderful as we're thinking about these things. And then it brings us back to, Carl, what you were writing about in Paradoxes of Power, because if there are going to be these shifts, it is a huge rupture. Stu, I know that even with being asked to speak certain places, or not being allowed to speak certain places because the discussion is not to be had at times, right? So Carl, I'll start with you. We see this, and just like we're having this conversation here, and viewers will listen to this, watch this, and perhaps begin other conversations, and it may result in letters to some leaders or actions, as we see, whether it's the pipeline, oil spills, fires that are burning and people in crisis. But how realistic is it that then this will lead to change in time to save us? Carl?
What you just described, Janice, were those leadership malfunctions that we tried to identify in Paradoxes of Power. It's worth noting that we had 3 millennial authors, essayists, that we included in the book that Stu and Veronica and I collaborated on to pull together along with the other authors. And it was all about trying to identify gently but abruptly, if I may use those 2 terms, the malfunctions of leadership. It comes down to people not understanding, not orienting themselves to what their organizations are supposed to accomplish, introducing this notion of paradox, and finding ways to overcome that. Stu and TAP and Mike and his explanations have given us some rigor that we can organize our thoughts around. Veronica and our other millennial essayists provided us with an orientation towards what we really should be thinking about, and that's our future. As you recall, Janice, we dedicated Paradoxes of Power to our future generations.
Yes, and it's fine to say the other essayist was your son. It's a family affair, and I think that's great to share as well. And that you wanted to make sure this came out before the 2020 election because of a lot of concerns that you had at that time. But please continue.
Yes. I mean, it was important for us to marshal our thoughts and our energies towards trying to elect the right kinds of people that can start to lift us out of this situation that Stu and Mike and Veronica have described so well. And that won't happen unless we do orient ourselves applying just common sense leadership, followership relationships. And that orientation we try to describe, we lay out in terms of a variety of leadership malfunctions that occurred across economics, across religion, across politics, across the environment, of course. In our most recent effort, I'll just plug James Fallows and his Our Towns Foundation that Stu and I collaborated on, and Veronica and I also collaborated on an essay for this foundation.
5 years ago, we asked people to tell us the story of your town. We've been traveling and reporting.
We thought there must be something going on in America.
Yes, and our town has wonderful stories. And I think that that's one of the things that is so important to highlight. And that's what we love to do here as well, as always share the stories of the people who are heroes. Veronica, you were sharing earlier about some of the actions that you're taking. Tell me a little bit about your business as well and what you are focusing on a daily basis.
Yes, thank you, Janice. In fact, where I'm at right now is work. We're a family-owned and operated escape room here in Colorado. And the room I'm sitting in right now is a new one that we're designing. And it's a Colorado themed game. And a lot of it too, we're going to start working with the park system. We want to kind of have people a fun thing for them to do, but also kind of teach them good environmental practices. So there'll be signs that say, stay on this trail and leave no trace. Because those are things that you see all the time when you're out in Colorado hikes is, you can enjoy nature, but to Stu's point, you're not above it. You're just getting to be this little part of it, and so appreciate what it is. So don't leave any of you behind. Don't take any of it away. Just leave it as it is and appreciate it. So
now, most people know what escape rooms are, but for those who may not be familiar with the concept, explain a little bit more about it.
Yes. So with an escape room, you would be in a room like this. We don't lock people in. It's kind of a safety thing, but you'll be solving different puzzles. You're opening up different locks. You can compartmentalize departments to complete your mission. You have 1 hour to do that. So for this game, you're kind of exploring the Colorado wilderness. You're hoping you can find the last remaining lynx, which is something, it was a program they introduced in 2000 to try and boost up the lynx population in Colorado. And so we're kind of playing into that. It's a little bit of fiction, a little bit of nonfiction. We always love to do that. And again, this is kind of one we've been wanting to do for a while. And I think after the pandemic, we realized, like, you know, we really needed to do this, not only because we're finally getting back to normal in business. We had to close for almost 2 months there last year. So we're really taking advantage of all the customers that are, you know, supporting our small business here. And so with the business, you know, all the materials that we use in here, if we can't, you know, find it reclaimed, we have a lot of reclaimed wood that we're using in here. Some of it we are just trying to find local. So again, it's trying to promote not only, you know, just being environmentally sound, being sustainable in what we put in our games and how we build them, but also about supporting local businesses and contractors and just kind of continuing the kind of microeconomy that we've had here. And I think that's something that a lot of small businesses need to kind of think about, is how can I partner with another business that we could have something that's mutually beneficial, and that's not only going to support the economy, but it's going to help the environment, because I'm not going to be purchasing a ton of stuff on Amazon, or you know, just using, really kind of thinking of the stuff that's around you that could be kind of DIY reconstructed, so to speak.
So really enhancing community. And I can tell the passion that you have about it. And certainly during these times, people have felt like I need an escape, and to have something that expands mentally as well as creatively is a great way to do that. And of course, doing it with social distancing when necessary, I'm sure. Well, and Mike, this really speaks to community. And when you talk about reimagining church with everything that's happened, explain more about what that looks like in a practical sense.
It harkens back to Stu's work, where, you know, we're accustomed to thinking that everything is caused. And yet, when we talk about creativity, sometimes it's not about something being caused, but something more about giving space. So his favorite analogy is, once a swim bladder shows up in a fish, for the purpose of a water column, a worm shows up. And you can't say the bladder causes the worm, but you can say the bladder makes the space for the worm. And what we do then together is somehow, and as I reimagine church, we create a space that, instead of being built on this idea of worshiping God in heaven, is about God hoping we become mature enough where, in a relationship of something collegial, we are sharing in the making of reality together. And I think the reality that God wishes to share in looks more like love and creativity than greed and cleverness.
And so for events and bringing community together, what are those like, the ones that you lead?
Well, so I'm starting something that I'm calling the fourth wall. It harkens back to theater, and it's that agreed upon imaginary wall between the stage and the audience. And if you break that wall, you break the spell that makes the whole theater existence take place or happen. And so I liken that to culture, that it's a tacit agreement between us. And if anybody violates it, we're offended. And we need a place that is safe, that says, no, let's talk, let's speak, let's think critically about what's taking place here. And instead of trying to argue ideology versus ideology, we bring an openness that says, all we care is that you bring openness and throw your ideas on the pile with the rest of ours. Let them work together, and out of that, let's see what kind of insights show up. And in that kind of space that we make together, things are able to show up that might not otherwise.
And it really speaks to humanity, and really recognizing in each person that each person deserves respect, which we do not see many times when people are talking about theology when we talk about politics and different parties. And what we've seen is there used to be more talk about reaching across the aisle, and now divisions are so entrenched. We're seeing that in so many ways in our country that truly it goes back to that old song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. That and the understanding that we are connected to God, and that it's important to be stewards of the land, be stewards of our minds, our hearts, souls, bodies, and that of our neighbors with respect as well. I can't believe that we're almost out of time once again. So I'm going to ask each of you one action step. If viewers watching are saying, what can I do toward making a difference in improving climate change? Veronica, I'll start with you.
I guess, I'll repeat myself again in that, just cutting the amount of meat that we eat is really all I can usually recommend to people. Just once a week, basically. Nice treat.
Okay, all right. Okay, how about you, Stu?
Restore the soil globally.
Okay, great. Carl?
Very simply, it's a leadership challenge, Janice. We need to understand that leaders are charged to be good stewards and to be good relationship builders. And we just need our leaders to be good leaders. That's it.
And so, Mike, I'll conclude with you, action that you'd like to see viewers and others take regarding making a difference with our climate crisis.
I think it would be something intangible in that what we have in front of us is a crisis. And part of the crisis, the way the Chinese draw it up, is this idea of danger, but this idea of opportunity. And I think we're hearing too much about, everything's bad kind of thing from a certain segment of politicians. And I'd like to say that instead of ducking our heads in the sand, let's engage in a full force of faith, hope, and love, and let's create our way out of this.
As you can see, when we start to talk about the global climate crisis, the discussions can go on and on. But that was the end of our part 2. And I hope that in watching this, it has inspired you to think about actions that you can take to make a difference as we are looking at how to address this global climate crisis. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Stuart Kauffman, Dr. Carl Hunt, Minister Mike Gottschalk, and Veronica Mata, co-author of Paradoxes of Power, for all that they shared and all that they're doing to try to have positive impact in our world. If you'd like to reach any of the guests from Paradoxes of Power, go to that website, paradoxesofpower.com. And that's our show. I'm Janice Edwards. Thank you so much for all that you are doing to make our Bay Area and our world a better place. If you'd like to reach us, please do so at thejaniceedwards.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel, TV Janice Edwards. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.